Opposed, say no. That's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, we have to do the water because Alistair Humphrey's under a tight schedule, and so are we. So,
and maybe Helen.
Yeah. So, I'm just wondering, can we invite Dr. Alistair Humphrey to come to the table as the Medical Officer of Health? I really would like. Is Alistair doing a presentation?
I think he's just going to talk.
You're just going to talk,
questions.
right? Sorry, I was. Right, I'm sorry. I'm a bit late back from opening the new store, and I just need to focus my attention. So I'll hand over to you, Helen, if you want to introduce Alistair and tell us how this the briefing on this paper is going to proceed. Thank you.
Certainly. So the Water Supply Improvement Program is the subject of this paper, and of course the changes in terms of the chlorine regime for the city, and that's where Dr. Alistair Humphrey comes in terms of some discussions that have been had between Council and the Medical Officer of Health and the Drinking Water Assessor. Do you want to say anything at the beginning?
No, I'll let you go.
Okay. All right, so I'll give you just a quick overview of the paper that's in front of you. So the Water Supply Improvement Program as a whole continues, and we're now at 77 out of 148 of our wellheads upgraded, which is great when you consider that we started out with 7 of those wellheads secure. There's work continuing on associated upgrades at the pump station, mostly around electrical and control systems, and also repairs and improvements to our suction tanks and reservoirs. So the focus to date has been on the progressive removal and reduction of the chlorine dose. However, back in June, July, following the publication of the Beyond Wellheads report to Council, the Medical Officer of Health and the Drinking Water Assessor expressed some concern about the integrity of our distribution network and the potential for contamination there. And I guess this is indicative of the very low appetite for risk in any community water supply following the Havelock North contamination event. So, and it also reflects some of the regulatory policy proposals that were published and talked about following the Cabinet paper in July. So residual chlorine is seen as the most appropriate way to mitigate that risk within the distribution network. And the practical outcome for Christchurch is that the Drinking Water Assessor is no longer providing her agreement that we cease chlorine at pump stations where the wellheads have been upgraded.
Sorry, do you understand why that's the case?
I understand that she has been instructed to do so, and that is the mechanism by which a residual level of chlorine is being maintained in the network being served by those pump stations.
Do you?
Right, perhaps I should explain. The Drinking Water Assessor under the Health Act, like the Medical Officer of Health, is accountable to the Director General. Our Drinking Water Assessor has received specific instructions from the Ministry not to sign off any further wellheads.
Thank you.
So her opinion does not matter. It is the view of the Ministry that no further wellheads should be signed off, and she is not in a position to be able to do that, even if she felt so inclined.
Thank you.
So the underlying concerns driving that goes back to the integrity of that distribution network, and through various discussions and conversations with the Ministry of Health officials and with the Drinking Water Assessor and the Medical Officer of Health, we've agreed that the best way to address that is through updating our water safety plan for Christchurch and the Littleton Harbour Basin settlements, and that'll be done under the new framework that the Ministry of Health have introduced. So we're on track to deliver that by the 30th of September, and we'll continue to keep you updated on that. So within that new framework, there's a revised approach to risk assessment. So that's the process of identifying all of the risks of contamination, how we mitigate and manage those risks, and then how we evaluate the residual risk and whether or not that's acceptable. in all of that, the thresholds of what is acceptable have moved. So there is a possibility that what was adequate in the past is no longer adequate today, just as with the wellheads, what was perfectly adequate in the past is no longer acceptable today. And through that water safety plan, we've agreed to take a much more fine-grained approach to our analysis of the risks within that distribution network. So what that means is we'll look at each water supply zone, and even within that zone at what's happening in the proximity to each of the pump stations and the areas serviced by various reservoirs across the city. So once we do that, we will have a much better idea of whether or not the current ways that we manage those risks are going to be adequate and get us over that threshold of acceptability of risk, or whether or not we may have to recommend residual chlorine in some parts of the city until we can address those risks within the reticulation. So that work is underway. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Is Alistair going to...
Well, I haven't prepared a presentation,
Right.
but what I will say is that I commend the council staff on their approach. I have strongly supported their approach of delivering safe water through the water safety plan, which is the way in which supplies are delivered across the country and have been for many years. The water safety plan is the appropriate tool to use, and the council staff will be working to deliver that. They will receive advice from wherever they can get advice from, which will include in part from some of our drinking water assessors, but the plan will be developed by the council staff, and that will, as Helen has said, that will be dealt with in a very fine-grained way, and I think that is the important thing for this city. That is perhaps one of the things that central government does not necessarily understand, the complexity of the Christchurch system, and that Christchurch can be dealt with section by section, which many water supplies cannot be. So I support their approach. We will be participating in it, though it is the council's water safety plan that will be submitted. And I also commend the council on actually delivering on this plan very, very quickly. I know they have been criticised for pushing it back from July, but the council have actually, they're one of the first councils in the country off the block. They have shown great responsibility in delivering this promptly, but also in a way that is carefully considered. So although I know they have been under some pressure from the ministry to get this done actually even before today, I think what the staff are doing is approaching it in a much more thorough way, in an appropriately thorough fashion, and they will be able to identify the risks much more clearly in the water safety plan, and identify those mitigating actions that will be required, which in some cases may be chlorine, but I haven't seen it yet and we haven't spoken it through, but I remain hopeful that in many cases it will not be. It'll be a staged approach where risk is dealt with, presumably beginning with the more significant risks at first and then moving on to those that are of less risk. So I commend the council on the way they're working, and look forward to working with them on there is a workshop actually tomorrow, in which I and one of the drinking water assessors will attend.
And that's around risk assessment?
It's around developing the water safety plan.
Right.
We do need to, as compliance monitoring and enforcement officers, we don't get drawn into authoring it ourselves.
No.
But obviously input from the compliance officer, particularly the drinking water assessor who has technical skills, is an important part of the process.
Something you said, though, I thought was really, really important, which kind of indicated that one-size-fits-all thinking, which is how I feel that central government is looking at the entire water supply in the light of, around the country in the light of Havelock North, and taking a rather jaundiced view, whereas the situation here is quite different. The approach that we've adopted has actually been an incredibly responsible approach to meeting what have been shifting goalposts, but in a way that's constructively trying to get to the end point, which is chlorine-free now, but keeping it chlorine-free under the new regulatory framework that's about to come, which is the exemption regime.
That's right. And though one of the barriers which the new framework has advocated is a disinfection barrier, though they have said that's a kind of one-size-fits-all, they have, as you rightly say, they have suggested that there will be exemptions. And we do know that there is international evidence that shows that water can be delivered very safely, and in many cases more safely, without chlorine, as long as all those the integrity, particularly of the reticulation system, is kept intact. And that will require quite a lot of work in Christchurch. We have got damage that we are still recovering from the earthquakes. There is maintenance that has not happened that should have happened. And all those things your staff and the council are aware of, they do need to be addressed. But when they are addressed, and I'm sure, it's up to you as elected members to canvass your constituents, but I as a constituent, I'm confident that we all enjoy and would like to continue to enjoy chlorine-free water, but as safe as possible. So I think we should still keep that as our endpoint, and we should work very closely and advocate very strongly with central government that Christchurch is responsible and is different, and we can deliver safe water without chlorine here.
Well, it's the under pressure aspect of that too, because poor condition may not necessarily mean that the risk is sufficiently high to warrant chlorination.
Yeah.
Pauline, Phil, Yanni, Vicky.
Thank you, and thank you, Alistair, for recognising the level of competency in our staff and in our drinking water improvement program, which I think we did hit the ground running on that, and thank you, Helen, for what you've done there. Just looking at the wellhead program, can you tell me, Helen, how many we have actually...
Can we focus on Alistair
initially?
Then
I'm going to Alistair after
No,
that
well,
one.
he's only here for another quarter of an hour.
Well, I can be here for another half hour. That's
Okay,
fine.
good,
So-
thank you.
Thank you. With the wellheads that we have had signed off by our independent engineers, how many of those are there
77 in total.
that have not been signed off by the drinking water assessor?
No, there's 77 in total been signed off by the expert assessor,
Yep.
and 45 of those have also been signed off by the drinking water assessor.
So that leaves 30-something that have not been signed off by the drinking water assessor.
That's correct.
And if they had been, they would be without chlorine now?
Yes.
Yep. And then the UV program, is that on track?
Yes, so we're doing the commissioning work for ultraviolet at main pumps at the moment.
Due end of September completion?
I would think it would be due before that.
Before that? Great.
So
And
we're just making sure that it's fully operational in terms of the network control. So the UV itself is going fine, and we're just fine-tuning the way that we're monitoring the turbidity.
Right, and the other thing with increasing our zones, so we can isolate more zones, when is that due to be completed?
So that's the work that was signalled back in June in the June report, and the funding for that would come through the long-term plan. However, the pilot program at Rafiti is continuing, and we are looking at whether or not we can bring forward the rezoning of the Linwood zone. So it's the central zone, of course, is the biggest, and Rafiti was the first part to move off. Then it would be Linwood, and then St Albans.
Right, the central zone would be covered by the UV anyway.
Only one part of the central zone, so main pumps delivers about 10% of the water to the central zone.
Right. So my question to Alistair then, in light of these things that we have achieved, particularly the pump stations that we believe are fit for purpose, but have been told not to be signed off, why would we not just stick with our resolution to remove the chlorine at the end of September, or when the UV's in place, in your view?
I think at the end of September, that's when the water safety plan will be submitted, and the risk the risk presented by taking the chlorine off will be well understood at that stage, and it is at that point, I think, that those kinds of issues can be discussed. The Ministry will have the opportunity to feed back on the water safety plan, so they may come back and disagree, and I think there'll be a bit of horse trading there. But it's the water safety plan that will determine that. I think the decision not to proceed by the council staff with removing the chlorine, but to reduce it, is a very wise decision. We were finding ourselves in a situation where in particular, there was a sense of confrontation developing. Not because of the council actually, but probably because there was a sense coming from some advisors in the ministry that there should be a confrontational approach to this issue, and I think it was very wise of the council to reduce chlorine rather than take off completely. As I say, our drinking water assessor doesn't have a choice in this.
Yes, I know.
So this really is a ministry decision, and it is best that we work the technical issues through with our technical people who are the experts, rather than the ministry come into confrontation with the council at this very sensitive time. It's always very sensitive, but it's even worse around election time if that kind of thing happens. So I think sensible decision. It also obviously keeps the water safer for the time being, until that plan I would hope would be first.
2 weeks ago, and he did say that priority would be given to it. But I think that as a follow-up from where we get to, I think that we are going to write to him and ask him to give some more definitive times to us, or commitments in terms of the time frame. I know they're under pressure too. And they know we are, so I think we'll get there. But
can I just add? I think it's important that you get commitment from timeframes. And the other thing to consider is that there is some form of commitment, and I know I've mentioned this the other day, from central government, that if this council works towards a chlorine-free system, that there is some kind of, it may not be a guarantee, but there is some kind of clear indication from central government that they aren't going to change, that they will accept the safe practices that are put in place and not change the goalposts again in the future. Because we don't...
I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Phil.
Thank you to both of you. I just want to clarify just for myself, because for the water safety plan that we're developing, so staff are working on that right now and working on the criteria and what needs to be done. Is it being applied to the different supply zones? Is that the case? That's work that's being done now. Yes. So we're still not sure how the different supply zones will measure up.
That's correct.
And then once it goes to Ministry of Health, it's even though we might say, look, we are applying a lot of resources and funding, and we've got a lot of treatment methods. There's no guarantee that they wouldn't require us still to treat some of the water zones with a low dose of chlorine.
I think what will happen in practice is there'll be an iterative process in terms of the assessment of that water safety plan. So they will look at the risk assessment and will inquire for some of the evidence behind that risk assessment and the evaluations that are in it, and use that in terms of their consideration of whether or not that assessment is reasonable. So I think that'll be the process. So I in some ways, I wouldn't want to hurry them and push them for a decision, because I think that process of their consideration, asking us questions and us providing evidence as to why we've come to the evaluations and decisions that we have will be quite helpful for both parties. So I think it's worth remembering that this will be the first major supply putting up a water safety plan under the new framework. So the Ministry of Health is test driving their new framework as much as we are test driving it for our supply. So while we have done 4 of these plans under the new framework for Banks Peninsula, those are very small supplies and relatively straightforward.
Yanni?
Thanks. I'm just trying to understand how much the social impact is a consideration for the Ministry of Health or the Medical Officer of Health. The social impact, for example, of people probably in the eastern suburbs where the reticulation network is probably the most damaged, having, you know, chlorination versus the rest of the city not, and what consideration that the community can have. Right.
So, in terms of where most of the chlorine is, most of the chlorine today is in the central and southern part of the city. So, in the further east we go, there was actually considerable damage out east, and a lot of new infrastructure has gone in place. So, for example, in the Rafferty zone, there's almost no chlorine left out there because a lot of those pump stations
Sorry,
are
I think
brand
my
new.
question was misunderstood. I understand about the pump stations and the wells. What I don't understand is about the reticulated network. What I sense that you're saying is part of the water safety plan, the new one. There'll be areas in the city because of the reticulated system and the reservoirs that have damage, that haven't been fixed, that will probably have chlorination, a requirement for chlorination until they're fixed. If it transpires that that's a huge amount of stuff in the east, I'm just wondering what consideration is given to the social impact of those communities who have already borne the brunt of huge devastation post-earthquake.
That's an incredibly unhelpful question because it's predicated on a whole lot of assumptions that actually I would challenge even without the technical knowledge that the two people at the end of the table would have. When you've got a water system under pressure, it is different to talk about damage in the reticulation network as opposed to the risks of bursts leading to intrusion, which causes contamination. I mean, you're drawing an incredibly long bow there, but I am not the technical expert. What I fear, though, is that a question like that creates an impression that that the assumptions are always correct. And in some instances they will be, but in other instances they won't be. And this is, again, my concern about the one-size-fits-all approach. The desire to have this paper come here in an open session is to inform the public, inform ourselves, and to sort of receive information from council staff. I think we will have some further work that we would like to invite you to do as a follow-up to this today, but I don't really want the focus of today to be on somebody's assumption about what might happen if something happens, if something else happens.
Happy to withdraw that. I guess I was just trying to understand in terms of the community being able to have input, a say, a voice in the process around the risk for whether we chlorinate or not and what the risk level is. What consideration is given to that? Put aside the east and west divide.
What I will say is the system we have at the moment has compliance and monitoring assessed locally by drinking water assessors. They feed up to an enforcement officer, which in effect is the medical officer of health, who is there to represent the local issues. That is, in my view, that is a good system, and I hope we retain local input into the system with this new proposed system from central government. I am very well aware of the value that this community places on unchlorinated water. The risk assessment that will be carried out as far as the water safety plan is a risk assessment for genuine harm that may occur from a system that is not performing as well as it should do. And that will be section by section. It will not necessarily be in any one part of the city. But I agree that we are always mindful for the effect that a process might have on the way a community perceives it's being treated and the social consequences for that community.
But well, hang on, isn't the education side of this really important as well? I mean, I didn't hear a single complaint about the months of chlorination that occurred after the earthquakes. Yes. If people understand the risks, if they actually do understand that there are risks, I think that what people are feeling is that there is no increased risk, you know, and I'm kind of in that boat myself, but again, we are not compliant with the current drinking water standards simply because they've changed the goalposts in the meantime. The government's announced that they're going to shift to a system where we cannot rely on the secure board water status that we've been able to rely on in the past, which means that we've always been focusing on what happens next as well. So I'm just worried that there is an assumption that chlorination will only be made, or chlorination decisions will only be made for technical reasons. There will in fact be a dividing line, that this will either fit in the side where the risk is manageable and it's being managed appropriately, but in the odd case there might be an instance where something can't be managed. And I think if people understand that, then I think people will accept it. But what they won't accept is this blanket overall one-size-fits-all approach. You will chlorinate, full stop, which is what people are fearing.
I agree. And so I think articulating the risk and also the change in perception of risk and why these risks have been changed will be very important.
Right.
Yeah.
And just the final question I had was, is there any consideration of additional support for people that have things like allergies to the chlorine and the extra costs that associated with the social impact? Is there any opportunity for anyone across council, health to
That's
consider
really
that?
not this paper, Yanni. I mean, this is the water safety. This is an update on the chlorination issues.
There'll be no
It's
more.
not for the water safety plan.
No more support for those people in this city than there would be for any other city in New Zealand where they already have chlorine.
Yeah, Vicky.
One of the things that might just help there, though, Yanni, is the fact that the where we don't have the double sign-off, we are still able to reduce the dose, and that will certainly help people who have trouble with skin conditions.
Yeah.
So that will assist.
Alistair, thank you for coming, and I hesitate to ask questions about the Ministry of Health to you because it seems completely unfair, but I'm going to have to. So three questions. You raised the Ministry of Health time frame in terms of that this would be at the top of their priorities and it would be sensible to request a time frame from them. What do you think is a reasonable time frame for them to come back on this?
It certainly would be, we want this finished before Christmas. So we want them coming back promptly through October, November. And they have agreed, I mean, they talked about it taking several months, but their contractor and the Director of Public Health came down and spoke to staff from the council and said they would prioritise this, so it will be first off the block.
So just in terms of the regulator of drinking water, as I understand it, by midway next year it won't be the Ministry of Health.
It doesn't look like it, but I can't speak for that.
Right. So just in terms of changing goalposts, presumably we could go through all this and then, surprise, new regulator, new rules.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah. And also bear in mind that there are aspects of the law that will need to be changed as well.
Yes. The last question I have is, how do you explain to somebody with zero chlorine in their water, because that was signed off by our expert and at the time the drinking water assessor, that's okay, but next door that they've got to have 0.2 in their chlorine despite the fact that that's been signed off by our expert but can't now be signed off by the drinking water assessor? How do you explain that as a man of science?
The way I would explain it is that the ministry has raised the standard of risk management. In other words, they are more risk averse than they used to be, but notwithstanding that, the risk will still need to be quantified. That is what the water safety plan is there for. So they are taking a precautionary approach in the meantime. They are saying that they have decided that they need to have a higher level, a higher standard across the whole country. And in the meantime, until that can be worked through using the water safety plan, that they are taking a precautionary approach. They do not want to have a situation where contamination may end up coming out of people's taps. Now that's a small risk, but they've decided that the risk that was acceptable is no longer acceptable.
Well, doing that as a risk-based approach, wouldn't they take a uniform decision?
They have tried to. They have tried to. All right? It has been resisted.
Ian?
For your advocacy on our behalf. We all share the same goal, is to get chlorine out of this water, and we appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, Helen, we appreciate you totally. I just wondered if the drinking water assessor had been allowed to sign off all those pump stations, how much chlorine would be in the water by the end of September?
None.
None. Okay. So we're actually on track, weren't we, to achieve what we wanted to achieve?
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
Okay,
so
that's important.
at the moment about 60% of the water is coming from secure wells.
Yeah.
65%. Mm.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's the first question. Will our water safety plan reflect our uniqueness here in Christchurch? Is it allowed to be tailor-made?
Absolutely, yes. So, and in particular the fact that we have 53 individual pump stations across the city, which is like 53 small supplies in essence, and then we have a number of distinct water supply zones that those pump stations service. So yes, the distributed nature of our water supply is one of the real strengths that we have in terms of managing any potential for contamination, and certainly in managing any breaks or any maintenance work on our network.
Right. And two more questions quickly. People are concerned about how much money is being spent here and wondering where that's coming from. Can you just give are you able to just give us a brief summary of where that money's coming from?
So all of the funding for the water supply improvement program, which is mostly about the wellheads, was brought forward from the current long-term plan. So that was already on budget, but we've brought it forward so that we can deliver the work in 2 years rather than over 10 years. And we are signalling further funding in the next long-term plan for continuing the work on the integrity of the water supply. But it's worth noting that the Christchurch water supply system is extraordinarily cheap and good value compared to those in other cities, and that is because of the proximity of a superb source water and the groundwater running under the city. So most other cities have to look far and wide to collect their water, and then they have to treat it, and then they have to introduce it into the network. So we don't have to undertake those steps, and that's why the cost of delivering water to the tap in Christchurch is very low compared to most other community water supplies.
Final question, would it be fair to say that at the same time that we're working towards meeting the standards that are required, we're also preparing for exemption? Would that be fair to say that that's a two-pronged approach?
Yes, that's correct. So the sort of strategic framework for the water safety plan is our water supply plan, and the water supply plan is very clear that the view of council is that there is no residual disinfection in the Christchurch supply. So that is our starting point, and residual disinfection is only used where absolutely necessary.
Great. Thank you very much.
I've got Jimmy, Dion and Vicky.
Thank you. I have two questions. Okay. First one, I would like to ask Dr. Humphrey, regarding to the health, the safety, the aspect, the dose between the 0.2 and the 0.5, have any the difference? The health, safety aspect.
Well, Helen might want to comment a little bit on this, but the minimum dose required, it's called the free available chlorine, is 0.2, and when chlorine is soaked up by biomass, whether it's by plant material or animal material, it's removed from the system, so you can tell its effectiveness by what's left behind.
Yes.
In the sense that a bore head might present a risk, all you need to do is eliminate the risk at the bore head. Mm-hmm. So once the bore head is fixed, you can drop the dose to knowing that bore head is safe. Okay. Helen might want to comment on the technical process by which you ensure that you have a residual through the whole network. But there are ways of retaining safety by not having a residual everywhere.
Okay.
Well, that's absolutely right. So the 1 part per million and then the 0.5 part per million that we were dosing previously was to cope with any potential for contamination at the borehead, and it had to be high enough to eliminate that contamination. So to essentially disinfect the water if it was contaminated. Once that borehead is secure, that is no longer a concern, and it's a very low dose that is there just in case any contamination is introduced through the network.
Okay,
So that's why the difference in the dose once
okay, that's my second question. So if we review the 4.13, at moment we have 25% the dose is 0.2, 45% 0.5. But if until the end of September, if all those we progress, all those borehead, whether these the 45% will drop to the 0.2.
That's exactly right, yes. So the as those boreheads are upgraded and we have the experts sign off to say they're secure, we will drop the dose to 0.2. So
That's
we're
by the scientist, by the engineer. Science.
Yes, that's correct.
It's not an assessor, not independent assessor.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Dion, then Vicky.
Yeah, I think Vicky may have asked the question and it may have been answered, but I'll just, for clarification on my head, I'm looking at 4.13 as well. So we've got 30% of the water that's delivered unchlorinated, and you said that that had been, they've tried to...
There was a suggestion from the ministry that chlorine should be put right the way through the whole system. Right? I was not prepared. I did not believe that was necessary, and I personally pushed back against the ministry on that.
And they listened to you on this?
They did listen to me. Yes, I said I wasn't going to do it. I did not want a confrontational approach. I did not think it was useful. Moreover, I did not believe that there was a risk. So that you'd have to have evidence that there was a risk if you were going to take any kind of enforcement approach, and I didn't think there was.
And would there be a risk on the 25% at 0.2 to take an enforcement approach on? Because, I'm just thinking about the inconsistency here.
Well, put it this way, I don't believe there is. I also believe that if I were to be overridden, which is that is possible to do under the Health Act, the Director General can actually come in and issue an enforcement compliance order. I believe that the Director General would have to look very, very carefully at his evidence if he was going to do that.
Okay.
And I don't think the evidence is there. I don't think he would find the evidence. And that, of course, would put the ministry very much at a legal risk, because it would be challenged, and rightly. It would be challenged rightly. And so your evidence has to be very strong before you issue a compliance order. There are two parts to, as I explained the other day, there are two parts to issuing a compliance order. One is where a water supply is clearly not compliant. That has never been the case in Christchurch. It has always been compliant. The second part is where there is a public health risk. And that risk has to be, I believe, an extraordinary risk. It's not a run-of-the-mill kind of quality improvement issue where you're just improving your system. It will be something akin to the kind of risk we faced after the earthquakes. So that second part of that particular part of the Health Act implies that you have to be very clear about the risk. You have to be able to demonstrate this evidence before you issue a compliance order.
Thank you, that's quite helpful. Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, Vicky and then Pauline.
Two further brief questions, if I may. Once this has gone through the Ministry of Health as regulator, does that bind the next regulator in terms of the water safety plan for the remaining period of the 5 years?
As it should do, is my answer, yes. I don't suppose they're going to
We do
step
have a
in.
current one.
Yeah, I don't
that we did in the
imagine a
18th
new
of March,
regulator will step
or
in and
March
say,
last
right,
year.
we're going to toss all the water safety plans out and everybody has to do them all over again. It's a lot of work, and that's
Yeah,
why
we
it
know.
is so why this council needs to be acknowledged and the staff need to be acknowledged. It's a tremendous amount of work to do this. And the idea is, as has been said, it's a journey, not a destination. You set out the ways you will deal with risk over a period of time. So I really hope they don't do that, and I would be surprised if they did.
Would you really?
Yes.
Sorry. Right, okay. And the second question relates to the source water and the increasing nitrates coming underneath the Waimakariri and the proposed average level of 3.8, which means effectively an 11.3 maximum acceptable value for our drinking water, and very, very slow mitigation proposed by ECAN. Is the Ministry of Health, or are you going to, anybody from the Ministry of Health, given the need to protect our water, going to do anything about that plan change?
Yes.
Great.
We are submitting on it, and we have already expressed our. The fact it went through in the first place, we were not very happy with. We had submitted that should not happen, and it did in any case. It happened. The modelling, as you rightly say, the modelling from ECAN themselves shows that we can expect the nitrates in our water. There's a relatively high chance of the nitrates going up quite significantly under Christchurch, and they have to do something about it. And it is part of, actually, to commend the tightening of the regulations, they have said source water needs to be protected. And I would like to see the ministry putting the same energy into protecting the source water that they have put into ensuring that Christchurch water is safe.
Have they set an average value, given the impact of average values on potential maxima in certain areas? Have the ministry set a maximum average value?
No, they haven't. No, they work to the New Zealand drinking water standards essentially. So the MAV remains at 11.3 actually.
Pauline?
The Ministry of Health, are they acting lawfully by instructing the assessor not to sign our work off?
I think they are certainly within it's perfectly reasonable for them to instruct a drinking water assessor what to do. The drinking water assessor under the Act is directly accountable to the DG. By implication, the DG can instruct a drinking water assessor.
But surely they need a reason?
If you look at, in my case, I won't speak for the drinking water assessor, but if you look at my case under Section A7B, if the Director General overrides something that I do, where particularly in a case where part of the legislation requires me to have a belief in something, I have to believe there is a risk, for example. The Act says that the DG has to believe. If I don't, the DG has to believe that, and therefore there has to be good evidence. So normally when you're in court and you are challenged on a belief, it's not quite as simple as saying, well, I just happen to believe this is correct. If you're an expert, you are expected to give reasons for that belief. You are expected to set them out. So the DG, when instructing me, and presumably when instructing a drinking water assessor, would set out their reasons.
So would it be acceptable for us to request the reason for that instruction?
Yes.
So perhaps we could do that. And my second question is just to Helen, with our UV, does that have to be signed off? It's a different thing, isn't it, than a repair program?
Yes, the UV does have to be signed off, so the ultraviolet treatment as such will need to be signed off by the drinking water assessor.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, could we...
Sorry, we've been up here working away at the sort of kind of resolutions that flow on from the questions. I mean, the questions have been fantastic, so I really appreciate the way councillors have approached this. And, I mean, we're picking up a number of things. One is that last one, which is requesting the reason for the direction, which I think, that very good point. Requesting the that staff on, well, it's really requesting the Mayor to meet with the Minister of Health and health officials to obtain an undertaking that once the Christchurch and Littleton Harbour Basin water supply safety plan is approved, they will not require mandatory chlorination. So that's trying to pick up they won't shift the goalposts again, because I think that's going to have to be at a government level, because it won't be the Ministry of Health, won't be the regulator, and we won't know probably until next month. Well, is it September that they will make their announcement, or will we waiting till...
Legislation has to be drafted and introduced into the House, and that's expected at the end of this year.
That's happening in December.
Yes.
But aren't they making another announcement beforehand to give us a steer on the regulatory proposals?
Possibly, but it still has to go through a legislative process.
No, I'm not saying it's going to come in overnight, but... Okay, well, anyway, at some point we will know, but it will still be the Minister of Health, won't it, sitting at the top of that, because it's a water safety issue. Surely it is. We don't know. Okay,
It's possible it would go to something like the Environmental Protection Agency, which has its own board.
right. All right. Okay.
Can I just say that I think what you're wanting is to be, if there are criteria to be set around it, gaining an exemption from disinfection, what we need to know in advance is what are those criteria going to be. That's what we need to know.
Well,
And that they will not change.
The way that I read the government's announcement was that the new regulator would set those criteria. Well, that's a long way away.
Yeah.
So,
So we need to remember there is no requirement for mandatory residual disinfection today
I know.
under the existing standards.
Yes.
What has happened is a shift in terms of tolerance for risk.
Yes.
It's not that there's already a regulation in place to require chlorine.
Okay. Look, take that one out, because so what we're really doing is we're saying that we'll continue to oppose changes to the regulatory policy for drinking water that would require mandatory residual disinfection. So we oppose mandatory residual disinfection. It's not a good policy process at all. And if such a provision is introduced, we'll seek an exemption for the Christchurch and Littleton Harbour Basin supply, and we'll seek an early assurance as to the criteria for that exemption process. No? Without the latter?
I would prefer to do it through the water safety plan, because the water safety plan is, as Dr. Humphrey has said, is where you put forward how you're going to manage it in a holistic sense, and it reflects the nature of our supply, which is quite different to other supplies.
Okay, well then can we, would we seek an assurance that the exemption criteria will that the provisions of our water safety plan will meet the criteria of the exemption?
What we could seek is that once for any supply that has an approved water safety plan, that water safety plan is allowed to run its course.
Sorry? Oh.
That for any supply that has an approved water safety plan under the new framework, which is what ours will be
exempt from the
will be allowed to run its course. So it will be allowed to stand for the 5 years that we expect it to stand, before having to be revised to meet any changes in the regulatory environment.
Right.
So that would give you a reasonable transition period, if you like.
Yeah. Because it actually then wouldn't make any difference that they removed the secure borehead status, bore water status, because you would be compliant with a risk management regime that had been signed off.
That's correct, and
Right.
and it would be under the new framework.
I've got it. Sorry, that was a technical journey that I hadn't expected to go on, and I think I now have it clear about the way that we would do that. We want to continue to confirm our desire to remove any temporary chlorine dosing from the Christchurch supply with urgency, with the exception being chlorine required in any emergency situation. I mean, we're not going to say never, because there will be requirements. Requesting that staff report back to us on the 12th of September regarding the progress on the updated water safety plan and the earliest date that temporary chlorination can be removed. So that's asking you to come back to us with that, because I think there's been a really interesting exchange here about how we approach the environment that we're in now. Requests the staff to provide regular reports on the development, assessment and approval of the water safety plan and the consequential work program that will lead towards gaining exemption from residual disinfection. Requests that staff seek confirmation from the Ministry of Health that the Christchurch safety plan, etc., will be approved by Christmas. Christmas 2019. Sorry, I've been caught out by that one before. Requests that staff seek an explanation for the direction that the drinking water assessor no longer sign off the repaired wellheads. Yeah.
Sign off on the upgraded wellheads.
So, longer sign off on the upgraded wellheads. And request, no, take that one out. We don't want that one.
That's changed to, once approved, it will be able to run its course without any increase in requirements.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
To seek an undertaking that once the safety plan is approved, that it will be able to run its course
Without any increase.
without any...
Well, yes, that once the water safety plan is approved, that it will stand for the 5-year period.
Oh. That it will be able, that it will stand for the 5 years without additional requirements.
I mean, there is a standard process of implementation audits to ensure that we are indeed implementing that water safety plan in the way that we said we would. So that would be fine.
So it will stand for the 5 years.
Yep.
And should we just put subject to those internal, subject to the...
No,
audit?
that's fine.
No,
that's fine, yeah.
fine.
So the audits are a standard
They're
part of
in
it.
there.
Yes.
Yeah. So the protections are in there. Okay. So Phil. Yeah. The upgrade, no longer sign off the upgraded wellheads. All right. So this is belts and braces, but so is there anything else we want in there? Yanni?
Yeah, I thought we had a resolution to meet with local MPs, and I just wanted to find out if that was still happening or if we need another resolution to do that.
I think it would be worthwhile just reinforcing this. I'm just not 100% sure where we got to with establishing such a meeting. I actually did run into one of the MPs at the opening of Kathmandu before, and he was very interested in hearing an update on where things were up to. So, I think number 9, meet with local MPs to brief on the current situation, so that they're fully,
Yeah, and maybe we could put a date or a time frame on that, or with urgency, or...
Do you want the District Health Board to be briefed as well?
Well, I think that would be...
Do they know anything?
I mean...
Well, they got briefed by the Ministry of
Possibly,
Health.
yeah.
I think it might be a good idea.
They're in the election period, so I don't
these are the
know.
elected members. I think it would be good.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can... I mean,
Yeah.
it's obviously the election
I don't think
period,
we'll hold
so-
it up, but meet with local MPs to brief them on the current situation. It would be quite, I mean, I don't know what their schedule is, but I think that...
First week in September, first week in October.
So, okay, well, we'll try and
We could ask the
as soon
Queen
as
to dissolve
we'll just put
Parliament.
as soon as possible. And it may be the first week in September we can
Okay.
do that, which is next
I
week.
just think there's lots of information that we've seen, and the staff and the medical officer of health have done really good presentations, and it would be good to just make
Yeah.
the local MPs aware of the information.
I
that we
agree,
have.
and that there's a desire for them, from them, to be briefed as well. Pauline?
And I'm not sure how to word this, but we would like central government to step in and protect our groundwater from nitrate pollution. So we want something in there where we direct staff to request the government do something about this
Compliance order.
urgently. Because we're protecting our groundwater ourselves, but we can't protect it in a jurisdiction that we don't control.
Yeah, I have written to both ministers, but I agree. I mean, we'll just keep saying it.
Yeah.
I think there is now a willingness to develop the research to back up the Danish study. New Zealand is ideally placed to do a study that would back that up. So
Yeah, but that's another thing. Study is study, but we know
yes, I
that
know,
we don't
but
want any more
Pauline,
nitrate in there.
once you get a backup study to what's happened in Denmark, then the World Health Organization will review the standard.
Yeah,
At the
that's-
moment, we're
yeah.
arguing against a standard which is way out of date.
Yeah, I
So-
realise that, but still, we don't want any more in there, full stop. So,
Yes.
yeah. Well,
Answer that we didn't ask.
I think it was all pretty well covered, and I do think source water protection is the most important issue.
So do we. Just so it's crazy that we're focusing on this.
No, we've already written it.
No, put it in.
so we could look at source water protection outside of our jurisdiction as foremost in our minds.
So I'm just put reinforce the urgency. No, with central government, the urgency of source water protection from nitrates.
Well, plus ECAM will have this passed under urgency by the time the research is done.
Yeah. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this as well, which is why I've written to the ministers as well about the subject, but the research is vital if we are to get the World Health Organization standards to be brought up to date, because I'm worried that they're out of date, and if the Danish study can be backed up, I think that our environment provides the best opportunity for that to happen.
View on that, Alistair?
Yes, and I'm waiting to go to a meeting to discuss some research right now.
You're waiting to go now. You're allowed to go.
Yes.
I should say the request to meet with the MPs previously did say the new drinking water safety regime and other water matters. And I mean, I think we should be raising that concern with the MPs
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
thank you very much, Alistair. It's much appreciated. Right. I think we're very lucky to have, a medical officer of health who's so passionate about these issues. He is absolutely passionate about the nitrates issue as well. I do take great comfort from the fact that he does care at the same time as having the scientific wherewithal and the advocacy to support the outcome that we're all trying to achieve. So, are there any other items that we want to add to this?
Can we get one?
Well, I'm happy to move it. Do I have a seconder? Everyone?
If you want, yeah.
Deal. And, okay, so I'll open it up for debate. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?